Hello, friends. Can I encourage you to take your seats so that I can get the unified force that will be presenting a unified force up on stage? I love the thing that goes round and round. Do grab your seats. Fantastic. Good, good, good. Just a few people still. Did anyone make it to coffee and back? Didn't even try is the correct answer. That is the correct answer. Didn't even try. Hello, online people. I hope you have coffee nearby to wherever you are. If you're at work, I hope the coffee space is full stocked. If you're at home, I hope your kitchen kettle is good. Good, good, good. Right, so I'm quite excited about this session because I get to stay on stage rather than saying 3 words and going off. Welcome to a unified force where we're going to be looking at some of the statements people have made on this stage during the day so far, like, this is potentially the biggest industry in the world. And the big question of, well, if it's going to be the biggest industry in the world, where are we going to get all the people we need? What kind of people are we going to need? And how do we make sure that we are keeping all the skills that we need within the fusion sector? And to do that, I've got some people who work in fusion to help me. I'll introduce them in a minute. But just before we do, we've actually got a video featuring some of the kind of early career rising stars of the fusion sector so that they can give you an idea of the things they would like you to know about this area. So I'm going to look at my beautiful bank of technical specialists and say, can you play us the video of our early career fusion?
The climate crisis is terrible.
The world that I've been growing up in has just been burning this whole time.
It really worries me, and it worries all my friends.
You just need to look around the world at all the different things that are going on.
This is the hottest year we've had in history.
I'm personally feeling the effects of climate change.
No one wants the world to end.
It's scary to think about.
Energy demand is only going up.
We need to stop burning fossil fuels.
We'll definitely need an alternative.
And we can actually find an alternative to fossil fuels.
Fusion is the concept that has given me hope.
Arguably the most important technology for the entire human race, not overselling it.
One of the biggest issues that sort of humanity is facing.
The more people who know about it,
the more people who we have with different skills,
the faster it's going to come.
I'm a graduate development engineer.
I'm design engineering at A level.
A diagnostic project engineer.
Education and outreach team.
An engineer. Experimental physicist.
And I'm in the clean energy program.
Mechanical design engineer.
So there's room for everybody in fusion.
Trying to build these mini suns on Earth, like, I couldn't think of anything more fun.
This is a technology that we have now that is producing results.
We actually have a really good shot at getting this to work.
I feel like I'm achieving something that's going to help people and help our planet.
I really feel like I'm doing something that matters.
It's incredibly motivating. There's nowhere more exciting to be.
I care since it is my planet and my home, and I want to protect it as much as possible.
We are the next generation, and we are the ones that can bring about the change.
Fusion is the answer.
Fusion is the answer.
Fusion is the answer.
It starts with us.
Thank you so much. Can I have a big round of applause for our people around the world? I might get my panel up here. 2 of my panel you're going to recognize from that video as they come up. So first of all, from UKAEA, Leah, can I ask you to come up? Come and grab a seat. Come and grab a seat. This is Leah Morgan from UKAEA. Rosie. This is Rosie Barker from First Light Fusion. And then joining us for a slightly wider view is Ben Rutter from Bond Global. So we're going to start the session by, we've got 2 kind of early career rising stars of fusion, fans of Guy Martin's Great British Power Trip will recognize Leah as the official face of the UK Atomic Energy Authority on that. Yeah. And they're going to talk to us about how they got where they are and the kinds of things that attracted them to fusion and the kinds of things that are keeping them in fusion at this stage in their careers. So, Leah, can I get you to go first, and then we'll go to Rosie, and then Ben is going to look around the whole sector and the whole world and help us understand what's going on. Leah.
Sure. So my name is Leah Morgan. I am a diagnostic project engineer at the UK Atomic Energy Authority. I studied for physics at the University of Sheffield many years ago. It wasn't that many years ago. And sort of got to the end of my degree, decided I didn't want to do a PhD. Too much thinking about just one thing, it's not really for me. And I started looking around for graduate schemes and found UKAEA's graduate scheme. I was not qualified. I did apply anyway, because it was in my head this sort of dream job that I couldn't possibly get. And went through the interview stage, met my line manager, he convinced me to switch to engineering, which was a new career. And I have been a project engineer at UKAEA ever since. I'm currently managing one of the largest projects in my department, which is a €2 million diagnostic for the ETA tokamak, which has been very exciting for me as a step up career-wise. And on top of that, I founded the UKAEA's Women's Network and ran that for several years. I sort of helped set the framework for internal networks in general at UKAEA. So this was the introduction of stakeholders, of funding, of some easy steps people could take, which meant that straight after the Women's Network, many other networks then became official networks at UKAEA. I'm a mental health first aider, I'm involved with the outreach team. I was an inclusion ambassador, but I have stepped down from that role. And I've also been a union representative several years, so busy.
Fantastic, thank you, Leah. Now, Rosie, can you tell us your story?
Yeah, so I'm Rosie. I'm an experimental physicist at First Light. So I did a physics degree at Oxford, and when I finished, I went and got myself a job on a graduate scheme as a software developer. And I lasted about 6 months as a software developer for a company that was writing the adverts that track you on Facebook before I realized that that was not quite the career for me. I realized I needed to do something that I felt was making a change, something that had a real impact, that I felt like I was spending my working days having a real effect on the world. So I did some research. I thought, I need to go back to physics. What industry am I going to go into? And I found fusion. And I knew, as soon as I read about it, that was the industry for me. This industry is going to change the world. This is going to solve the climate crisis. And that was what I wanted to work in. So I went and did a master's at the University of York in fusion energy. And through that, I did a project with First Light Fusion, and they offered me a job at the end of it. So I've been at First Light for 3.5 to 4 years now. And yes, I plan, run, and analyze experiments on our in-house machines. More recently, I focused more on modeling neutronics and also on the data analysis side of the experimental work that we do. In addition to that, I co-founded and run the inclusion committee at First Light Fusion. So we are working to basically provide a more inclusive culture and be more welcoming to everyone, whoever you are at First Light. And then I also co-founded and help with the outreach committee at First Light. So we go into local schools and local universities, and we're trying to stretch that into schools that are further away to tell them about fusion, why it's amazing, and why they should come and work for us when they leave school.
Fantastic. Can I have a big round of applause for both of our fusion experts? Rosie with the groundbreaking revelation that working in fusion is more fulfilling than tracking people on Facebook for a living. Now, Ben, you work for Bond Global. You are recruiting people for the fusion industry around the world. You've got a really wide view on who's looking at working in this sector and who isn't. I was wondering if you could tell us a bit about your experiences.
Yeah, sure. So in terms of my experience with fusion, I suppose I'm not a budding superstar like these guys, and don't deserve a round of applause like they do. But we've been working in this space now for about 5 years. And really interesting. When we first started, there were probably only really 3 companies in the world. There was one here in the UK, really. There was one in Canada and one in America of any real substance. And you fast forward 4 or 5 years to now, and we've now got 40 plus companies in the space, private companies, 6 billion plus funding, and amazing events like this. It just didn't exist. So it's come a long way, but there's still a lot of work to do. And one of the things we talk about, especially in terms of how companies in fusion, but not just fusion, this is any business really, or especially any scientific business or R&D business, we talk a lot about the concept of making it cool, not complicated. So I think businesses that are R&D or science-led are normally fantastic at sometimes overcomplicating what they do. And in doing that, you really are turning off the masses. So you're stopping people from leaning in And what we really want to inspire the next generation, or to make sure that we're attracting new people to the space, is you want them to lean in. And to do that, you've got to make it really cool and make it uncomplicated. The other reason why that's really important is a typical demand plan for a scaling business in Fusion, only 20 to 30% of the hires will need Fusion skills. The rest can be non-Fusion related. And in that, you need to really think about how the business is communicating and what you're doing, because actually 70% of your workforce, or maybe even 80%, will know nothing about Fusion on the way in. So we talk a lot about the concept of making it cool, not complicated. And I think that is something that, if I'm honest, I think in the USA they do probably, could still improve, but do it pretty well. I think here in the UK we could probably be a little bit better at it, and in Europe in general. But yeah, I think that's something that we talk about a lot.
Fantastic. And how is Fusion doing in terms of recruiting the people that it needs? Is it getting the people it needs, or is it not quite there at the moment?
I think if you speak to anyone in engineering, so if you take it back to physics engineering baseline skills, everybody in the UK and globally are still struggling to find that talent. So if Fusion companies are struggling, it's not a Fusion specific thing. I think it's a broader skill set thing across the globe. But I do think Fusion has an exceptional story to tell. It has a better story to tell than, in my opinion, any other sector in the world, because what Fusion are doing and what we are doing is, I think it has more purpose and has more potential impact than any other project going on in the world. So I think Fusion's doing okay, but it has so much potential to do more with what it's got in its toolbox, if you will.
Fantastic. I'm just going to turn back to our two Fusion... No, you're not Fusioneers, that's the next section. Fusioners. And I wanted to ask you both, how, because you both do outreach, don't you? How are you making Fusion cool, not complicated? Because that sounds very important.
So, I mean, my main tactic is definitely make it sound cool when I go to schools. The age groups we target at the moment are sort of year 7 to 6th form. And I start by assuming sort of no knowledge. I would hate to lose someone because I've assumed they know, you know, what an atom is. When you're talking to an 11-year-old, they probably don't. And I tell them the cool facts, but I always relate it back to something they know. You know, so I'll say our projectiles go at 7 kilometers a second, and that would get you from London to New York in 15 minutes. I try and always bring the facts back to something they can relate to, because otherwise I feel like you're just saying big numbers, and that'll start going over their heads pretty quickly.
Amazing. Leah, how are you making it cool?
So I tend to work with A-level students. So in addition to the outreach that I do at UKAEA, I also do science communication in my own time as a hobby. So I end up working with a lot of physics A-level students, a lot of just general A-level students. So I tend to focus on like the big ideas that Fusion has, because it's quite easy to get those kids on board with what we're doing. Particularly the ones who are worried about the future and they're worried about their jobs and what they're going to do next. So it's quite easy to access them there and bring them in for this exciting opportunity that's going to create loads of jobs, that is contributing positively to the world. So it's a little easier at that age, I think.
Definitely. Fusion's not a hard sell.
No.
Not to children. They're worried about climate.
Yeah.
Fantastic. And Ben, once Fusion's grabbed people like this, does it do a good job of holding on to them, or are they bleeding out into other tech and engineering sectors?
Yeah, I don't think they are bleeding out into other sectors. I think it does do a good job at retaining them. But it goes back to what you said there. It's all about the purpose. Most people that come into Fusion, it's because they know about Fusion and they're passionate about it. And through that, I actually think businesses can be maybe not perfect, but actually retain top talent, because they might not be aligning themselves necessarily to the business, they're aligning themselves to the purpose and the cause. And therefore, I actually think some science-led businesses in Fusion and other sectors, they can get away with not being as good maybe as other environments in terms of their holistic kind of like offering, because people are just so passionate about the cause and about the problem that they're solving. So I actually think Fusion does a pretty decent job at the moment of retaining the talent that it's got. But it is competitive and it is challenging. There's lots of people out there doing lots of cool stuff. And you've got to work really hard to make sure that you're reinforcing why they should stay, other than just the purpose around what Fusion's going to crack and what it can behold in the future.
Fantastic. So we're going to throw this session open to all those of you on the floor, all those of you online. If you are online, you can ask me questions via Slido, and they all appear on this, the largest iPad the world has ever seen. So do send me questions on that. If you're in the room, if you'd like to ask us a question, or even if you'd like to tell us something, as long as it's relevant and short, we will take comments from the room. But I wanted to ask all of you one more thing, just while people in the room think of their stuff. And I had it, but it's gone. I did that iPad joke, and it wiped my brain. Yes. I wanted to ask Ben, now that there's 40 Fusion organisations, do they compete with each other for talent? Is this now a thing that's starting to happen? And Rosie, Leah, like, are you up for being poached? Have people tried to poach you? What is happening in the UK Fusion sector around, like, as we said, it just being Fusion might not be enough for your organisation anymore?
Yeah, the talent is definitely there to be poached, but that it's a fair open market, and you get that in any market. That's not just Fusion, that's anything. I do think there's some not challenges, but I think it's more polarised here in the UK because all the talent is centred around one city, basically. So you've got the main three players all based in Oxford, essentially. So in that, anyone could work for any of those three, and therefore it probably is a little bit more competitive. If you look at maybe Europe or in America especially, the competition is really disparate. It's spread out all across America. So you might have a company that's going on a huge scale up in Boston, and a company's going on a huge scale up in San Fran. Well, the chances of that talent moving across country is going to be more limited, and therefore you don't see quite as much talent moving around. But yes, the answer is to your question, yes, talent is there to be poached, and people do take from each other, but not as much as you'd think, in my opinion, not as much as you would think maybe.
This is me shamelessly trying to add an edge to the session. Rosie, Leah, has anyone, like, you don't have to reveal names, but has anyone tried to poach you? Are you poachable? This is like a press conference at the end of a football season, isn't it?
I know people who've moved between Fusion companies.
That's a lovely way of answering the question. Well done.
But I think what worries me more is that we can't just poach from other companies. The workforce needs to grow. There aren't enough people for people to just move between them all. We need people from other industries to come in and join us.
I was going to say that Rosie and I were chatting backstage actually about retention within Fusion companies, and like the idea that you could move between any of them. I mean, I've interviewed at other Fusion companies, I have, and in the end I didn't move because of my pension where I currently am, which I know is lame because I'm 27. My pension though, Steve. But it's the idea of things around like purely salary or purely like specific job titles is this sort of general idea of what it's like to work at your company. And I like where I currently work.
It's fantastic. So we actually have an online question that relates directly to what is it like to work where you work. It's come in anonymously. And the question is, what is being done to address the lack of diversity and inclusion in the Fusion sector? And that is diversity and inclusion on many different axes. I've done Fusion events in the past, not this one, where I swear 20% of the people there were called Mark.
Yeah.
Do you want to go? Do you want to go first? I think it's interesting. There's different approaches being taken in different like spaces. So in America, the funding from the DOE, which is obviously really important to what's going on with Fusion out in America, it links back to diversity targets and metrics. So our clients in America are hugely focused on diversity, like laser focused on it. And part of the work we do there with our clients, they are constantly driving that agenda, and we're really having to put advanced methodologies in place to try and help do that. They're very involved in it, they're very willing to participate in that, to take part in workshops, make sure there's the right narrative on their websites, all those types of things. I think in the UK there is that narrative as well, and people do want to do it, but the reality is that normally gets pushed towards the bottom of a very important to-do list, whereas in America it comes to the top because it's linked to funding. So I think there there are different priorities around it. And I would say in America, they're probably a little bit further ahead of the curve than here in the UK, would be from some of my experiences.
And does that approach work in the US? Is it something the UK could be looking at and saying, do you know what, we'll just tie it? And
100%. I don't see any possible downside to not linking money to something other than just a technological outcome. So if it links back to diversity or whatever it links back to that has more purpose attached to it, I don't see any form of downside in that.
Fantastic. So both of you in the middle, you're driving this within your own organisations. How's it going?
Oh, I will start. I think at the moment in various organizations, there's a particular focus on recruitment, and recruitment is extremely important. The language you use, who's there on the interview panel, and everything like that. And then I think there's less of a focus on what happens to those people next. And I think the most that you can do at organizations is then provide those people with some kind of support. So whether that's internal networks, whether it's additional support given to line managers to help them support those people. I think there's sometimes this big focus on getting people in, which is awesome, we should be getting people in, and then not giving them support afterwards. It's very taxing to be the first of anything at any company. So yeah, I think more sort of networking support like that.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. There's a lot of focus on recruitment, and that is really important. But we tend to hire almost all of our female scientists as grads. They, fresh out of uni, they usually come to us quite young, and I think, yeah, the focus needs to be on retention. How are we going to keep those people, not just women, but, there's, many different aspects of diversity. As you said, being an only, being in a minority, it's exhausting, and, you need maybe some extra support. But even just, putting the policies in place so that they know that you've thought about them, so they don't have to ask every time. That's the kind of sort of caring environment that people want to stay in. If you feel like it's a bit of a battle every day, I think that's when you're not going to retain people.
I think with diversity, there's sort of two things. I think one thing is there's obviously many different types of diversity, and I think predominantly is a space we go to gender because it's normally the easiest thing to see and to feel and to track. And I think engineering environments do have a real challenge in that it is a very male-heavy dominated industry. And when we look at diversity across the portfolio of our clients, roles that are inside engineering, there is a lack of diversity. And then outside of engineering, in our operational roles, we see then more diversity from a gender point of view. There's obviously many different characteristics of diversity that as a space I think we can do a lot more on. The other thing though is totally different, a curveball on diversity is diversity of thought. And I think a lot of companies are quite insular in hiring people from UKAEA, people move over here and then those people move over here, and you do find a bit of a move around of the leaders normally coming from the same 2 or 3 companies. And in that you don't get a diversity of thought either. And I think that is also a real consideration for companies inside the fusion sector specifically.
Fantastic, thank you. Just to warn you all, I'm going to take a question from over here, but just because watching and here we have all the fusion employers, I am going to come back later and ask you all what you want from them. Like, not individually, but like, what changes should they be putting in place? How should they be thinking about their employees differently, what they're offering them? If it is hard being the first, what should they be doing to look after you? I'm going to bring you that later, but I'm giving you time to think about it while I take a question from here. So does anyone in the room have a question they would like to ask? Yes, well, I'll get you a microphone. Don't worry, here it comes.
Hello.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Sam Foster. I work for Jacobs. And this is a question for Ben. Obviously, you're in recruitment, but you obviously deal with people that are leaving their jobs and leaving perhaps the fusion industry. Do you see what the main reason is for that? Is it pay? Is it stagnation? Is it lack of other opportunities? Are people having to move sideways before they can go up? Or is it lack of benefits? Is it pension? What's the main thing?
Thank you. First, just Jacobs, love your biscuits. So good.
Yeah, they're radioactive as well.
Ben, so the question is, when people do leave, why do they leave? And if it's all right, I'm going to ask Leah and Rosie to ask the other take on that. What's keeping you in? Ben.
Yeah, sure. I think it's obviously hugely dependent on the individual, but it will normally be boiled down to two things. One for me is purpose and a mission. So has that purpose changed? Is the mission strong? Is the purpose strong? If that bit's right, you can normally mask a few of the other bits, like I'm being paid not quite as much as I'd like, my benefits aren't quite where I want them to be, I'm not moving quite as fast as I want, but like I'm so bought into what this company's doing, where it's going, its mission. I'm just so aligned to the leaders and the technology roadmap and all these types of things. So that's one area. So normally you'll find people moving because there isn't huge purpose. That isn't consistently communicated. People aren't super bought into the mission. And I do think that in Fusion, if you take away Fusion and move that to the side, and then look at businesses inside Fusion globally, what's left probably isn't quite strong enough. I think people do hang on to the fact that it's Fusion to keep them in. The other element is then your value, like holistic, like EVP, and in that it could be anything from salary to benefits, et cetera, et cetera. But for me, the two common things will normally be I'm not being paid enough, or I'm just completely like lost love with the direction this business is going in terms of purpose, values, mission. It will normally be one of those two things. The rest of the stuff may be different, like pension. Normally, like I'm getting a little bit of a lower pension, but I can cope with that. Like I don't quite get the lunch break that I want, but I'm engaged in my work, so it's okay. Like those types of things are normally okay, and people don't look at them. So purpose, money, normally.
Fantastic. Ben, I'm going to come back to you on a second on all the other things employers could be offering, if that's all right. But let's hear from Rosie and Leah. What's, other than the pension at the age of 27, what's keeping you in? What are the things that are helping you want to build this career and not go and do something else?
I mean, purpose is a huge one. You can see where this technology could go, and you want to be part of that future. So I won't pretend that purpose is one of the biggest things that sort of keeps me in. There's also things like the company culture is really important. Do you feel welcome? This is why I run the inclusion committee. Do people feel included? Do they feel comfortable at work? So that's probably the two most important things.
And I know lots of First Light, very senior people are here, but is the company culture good?
Yes.
Yes, correct answer.
Yes, question mark.
Leah.
I was thinking actually, in addition to my lovely pension, the main thing that I am offered is a clear path by my line manager, so I can always see what the next thing I'm going to be doing is. And I think thinking about like falling out of love with the mission, it's even more like my career's stagnated and I'm bored, which I think can be really, really demoralizing at work. Because I'm very realistic. I work for the government. My pay's never going to be the highest it possibly could be. But in return for that, I have this clear path that I can take forward. I have a healthy work-life balance and all these additional things around it. But for me particularly, it is genuinely career progression.
Fantastic. So I'm going to take what Leah just said. I'm going to add in a question that we've just had online, and then I'm going to ask Ben. So Gwen McNamara has asked us, how might national laboratories compete with private companies? Leah's said a little bit, but Ben, do you have any experience of this one?
Yeah, so I think, so everything for me goes back to, this is any business, goes back to your value proposition and your brand and how you're going to create a story around that. There was a chap on the stage here earlier talking about, it's not facts, it's stories and all that type of stuff from a communication point of view, and I completely believe in that. So it's about having a really powerful story of how you're going to position any business, but in this case a government business or a national lab. And I actually spoke to someone who was at UKAEA, they're not anymore, and we were helping, early days, helping a Fusion business go to market, and we'd headhunted them from UKAEA, and I asked him, I said, how, because we were really up, like fighting for talent between them, and sometimes we'd win, sometimes we'd lose. I said, how were you positioning UKAEA? Like, how were you positioning that environment? Because the money's not great, it might be perceived as being a bit slow, like, how are you doing it? So his positioning, which I absolutely loved, was basically we're the Champions League. So we are the Champions League of Fusion. So if you want to work with the best in France and the best in Germany and the best in the UK and the best, come to UKAEA, because we're gonna basically, we're the Champions League. This is the best of everyone, which is a really compelling value proposition. Now, once you deliver that, no one cares about salary. No one cares about like that. Those sorts of things start to become a distant memory, and they're hanging on working in the Champions League. Now, it's the same for the private fusion sector. They've then got to build their value proposition around how they're going to combat that. So theirs is going to be a different offering. We're going to move fast. If you actually want to see fusion before you die, you might want to do it here. Like those types of things, right? So it's about understanding where you are, what you can offer, but building a narrative and a story around it that's powerful. And then through that, you can start to weave that through all of your EVP, all of your brand positioning, what you're doing on your website, your job descriptions. But that's a huge process, and it needs to come right from the top. So you need CEO, founder, HR director, talent. They've got to drive that, they've got to build that, and they've got to own it. And sometimes the challenge is people can change and roles change, and that narrative can then change between the leaders as the business starts to grow. But that would be how would they do it? It's about finding something like that person did around the Champions League. Find your thing and really play on it.
Fantastic. So I'm going to throw back over to the room. Would anyone else like to ask a question of our panel? Hello, there's a microphone coming.
Yeah, hi there. I'm Darren Temple at the Open Data Institute. A question about going to schools, and we talked about fusion being cool and inspiring people. I was wondering, how do you go about having a conversation with kids at school to actually make it not so elitist, and that to say you can do it? There's a lot of focus on schools on like grades. You've got to aim for the A's, or otherwise you're not good enough to be a scientist and to move into this area. So how do you elevate people to actually make them realize that they can do that? What's your message at schools?
Fantastic question. Also, you're going to enjoy the next session in here. When you go into schools, how do you tell them fusion, although it's the Champions League, you don't have to already be Jude Bellingham to play in it?
I think one of the things I tend to focus on, particularly like GCSE level, I tend to focus on this idea that fusion isn't like all Albert Einsteins, because even at that age, kids have a really clear idea in their head of exactly what a scientist or exactly what an engineer looks like. So this idea that there's a broad range of things that they could be doing, and they don't have to be some genius to be really good at talking to people or really good at figuring out problems. It's like reframing what they're doing at school into something that's actually closer to what being an engineer or being a scientist is actually like.
And were you an Albert Einstein growing up?
I was a nerd, yeah.
Rosie?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things I always emphasize is we need every different skill set in fusion. The industry is growing hugely, and we're going to need so many different people. Just because you see scientists presenting this, we don't just need scientists, we don't just need engineers, we need technicians, we need people to organize the experiments, we need people to communicate why they're great, we need people to write funding applications. We need everyone of every background, and if it's something you're interested in, you will be able to apply your skills to it. If you don't want to go to uni, like there are apprenticeships on offer. If you don't have to go to university and do a PhD and then become a scientist. That's not what working in fusion is about. We need a huge range, and sort of that's the message I try and get across. If you are interested in this, we can apply whatever you enjoy to our industry.
Thank you. Would anyone else in the room like to ask a question? Otherwise, I'm going to fling Bannon on. Oh, yes, here we go. Hello.
Hi, Elina Militaresp, UKAEA. So the title of this talk is like a unified force, but I hear everybody's kind of fighting their own corner and try to get people and getting young people into the sector. So what do we do to work together to boost fusion? How can we work together?
That's a fantastic question. So now I've introduced the idea of you poaching each other's staff. How are you going to work together to make this a thing that is building as a sector rather than as individual organisations? Ben, you probably have to deal with this quite a lot. Do you work with organisations who are competing with one another?
Yeah, not just in Fusion, but outside of Fusion, we'll work with like huge brands that are fiercely competitive all the time. So yeah.
Do you have a feel for how this sector can kind of move as one while still retaining that?
I think there's two things to it. There's the reality, which is the reality is like it's like a free market environment, and everyone's going to have their own agenda with their own mission, especially private fusion and just private companies in general. So there's an element of it's probably never going to be one big happy family, because people do have their own goals and their own agendas, and there's things they want to go and achieve. So that's the reality. However, there are lots of opportunities to enhance and build as a community. I know there's work going on with inside UKAEA and some of the funding that's coming in soon. Some of the work that's going on in Nick's team that I think will have a huge impact on that. And I think that will be an opportunity to put more content, brand, education, allowing people to lean into the space, making it very cool, making it open and accessible. But the challenge is whose responsibility is that? Is that the responsibility of all the private fusion companies to get together? Or is that the responsibility of UKAEA? Or is that the responsibility of a conduit that sits between them all? Like, whose responsibility is that? Because that isn't going to just naturally happen. Someone's going to have to take ownership of that. And some people are going to want to play, and some people aren't going to want to play in that movement. So I actually think it's a really good question, but I think it's a really challenging one to get to work.
Leah, Rosie, you are the private sector and the public sector. How are you going to move forward as one?
That is what I've been telling people. I think there's certain aspects where, just by way of what we do, we positively contribute to each other. So outside of even the basic research that we're all talking about and sharing, for every positive outreach event that a company has, for every good piece of comms that people put out, the entire sector then benefits from it. And then on the other side of that, there's the idea that if you're out there doing outreach with your employees, that's going to massively improve how they feel about their jobs and how they feel about fusion. And there's an opportunity there to share good practice. So we're currently looking, for example, at our conditions of employment at UKAEA, and one of the main things we're looking at is what everyone else is offering. Like, what can you get elsewhere? What kind of benefits are there? So I think there's an opportunity to, I was going to say steal each other's good ideas, to collaborate, to show best practice.
Let's say we're moving forward in a unified way.
Yes.
We didn't steal their ideas. We adopted them as a unified force.
Yes.
Rosie.
Yeah, I think, people often separate in their heads private industry and maybe the government labs or whatever, but we do work together. Fusion, there are a lot of problems in fusion that all of us need to solve. If any of us are going to have a working power plant, certain things are going to have to be solved for all of us, and we do work together on those things. We also work together on some outreach things. So we're not like a completely divided industry, but yeah, it is a challenge. And
I see your point, I completely agree, but I actually think it will get people working closer together. I think the sector over the next 5 years is going to have to see more collaboration for companies to survive over the next 5 years. So I actually think the way this sector's heading will almost force it to collaborate through where money's probably going to come from and how companies are going to go on to do what they want to do in this space. I think they might be forced to collaborate as well, which will be really helpful, because without that, companies probably won't.
Ben, is there a way that employers can make that part of you talked about the value proposition that they offer to their employees, that no matter who you're working for, you are joined up and you are doing things together. Is that a positive thing for them?
Yeah, I think it can be positive, but it depends who you're joining up and who you're working with. So some people might say, well, I don't really want to go and do a secondment in that company, or I don't really want to go and collaborate with that company. Most people will, they'll see benefit in that, but it will depend, would it add value? It depends on how it's constructed, but I think it would, if it's done in the right way. I think people would see it as a major opportunity, a bit like the Champions League element. You're in this company, but we're going to give you an opportunity to go and learn from these great people and these great minds and these great minds over here. So yeah, I think it could definitely add value.
Fantastic. Now, if no one else has a question, I'm going to go back to our friend from Jacobs.
Hi, Sam Foster again. This isn't necessarily a question, it's just to add sort of some direction to your question about how do we unify the force. And there's going to be, I think, a slide in the fusioneering section on, so I'm working with Valerie, who obviously set up FUSION24, and it's going to be a new network called the Next Gen Fusion Network, which intends on on generating opportunities for young professionals in the fusion industry.
Tech room. Sam's foreshadowing the next slide. Could you put it up while he talks? That would be absolutely wonderful. We've got a little slide all about exactly what you're talking about. Look.
There it is.
So you can look it
Wow.
up. Well, no, thank you. I've got a minute set aside to do this. You keep doing it for me. It's better coming from you.
Sure, yeah. So the intention is that, well, we realized that there was a gap there. And so my intention is to grow this network between the various industries that are involved in fusion, obviously focusing on the UK at the start and then growing that potentially internationally. But at the moment, we're at an early stage where we are looking for people to just show an interest, and then secondly, to help form the network. So, I mean, I'll probably come talk to you guys afterwards. You don't have to say yes.
I love it. I just love it when a plan comes together. Thank you
know.
so much for
Thank
that.
you.
So, panelists, I said earlier on that I'm going to ask you to take advantage of the fact that we have all the big fusion employers here. And starting with Leah and moving this way, I'm going to let you use this platform to tell them what you want. Don't hold back. They've come to this session specifically to find out from people like you, what do you need? I'm going to start with BBC TV's Leah Morgan.
I think it was on Channel 4.
Channel 4 TV's Leah Morgan.
Well, I think we've had some discussion about, vaguely about pay, and I do think a competitive salary is still really important. And don't get me wrong, there's still a lot around that, but I think we've downplayed it a little bit, and I'm just going to raise it up a little. And then on top of that, a lot of the things that I value at work include things like flexible working and hybrid working, particularly where there are good policies in place. Do the line managers at your organizations know about them? Do they know how to enact them? Even if you've got the best policies in the world and the best support available, if someone comes to their line manager and asks a question and they don't have the answer, that policy is never going to be used. And on top of that, the opportunity to work with other companies, to secondments, things like outreach, just having the opportunity to collaborate with other people, even if it is GCSE students, is really, really enthusing, is the word I'm going to say. Yeah. Just coming back to work after an event like this, but also an event where you go into schools and you chat to kids, is so enthusing. It boosts morale to such a huge extent. It reminds you why you really enjoy the things that you do, particularly if you've been stuck on a project at work and things have become a little stagnant. It's just a really good opportunity for people, I think.
Fantastic. Rosie, your boss's boss's boss is probably here. What do you want to tell them?
I think for me, it's all about, work-life balance. I came into this industry because of the mission, because of the purpose, but what's going to keep me as my life progresses, my values are not what they were 4 years ago when I came into this industry. What's going to keep me is, flexibility around working from home, really flexible working hours, a sort of a degree of trust in your staff, and that comes down to culture as well. You're absolutely right about, that information being available to you and line managers actually making sure that it is implemented. So I think it's, you can't just rely on the purpose to keep people. I think, yeah, it's about work-life balance for me.
Fantastic. And Ben, you've got all of the people who are going to be recruiting and using your services in the future. What do you want them to know?
I would like to see them focusing more on employer brand. So I'd love to see people build brands and value propositions that could inspire a generation. So I think Fusion has all the tools in the toolkit to do that, but I feel like we often underplay it, and everyone's a little bit nervous to kind of take that route. But I would love, we always link it back to the space race and the stuff that's going on in space. Like, my kids can now go into Zara and they can buy a hoodie with NASA written on it. You look at what's going on with SpaceX, like, they are less important, in my opinion, than what's going on in Fusion in terms of, like, it's more important, it's more purposeful, and it's arguably just as cool a technology or technical problem to solve. But the narrative that those environments are able to build, like Elon Musk's incredible at it. So I would love to see Fusion companies invest more in their brand, their value proposition, and going to get the very best people in the world, because we're not going to crack Fusion without the best.
Fantastic. So part of what you'd like to see is when we come back for the next FUSION24 merch stand, kids gear, logos.
Yes, I promise I will buy 3 hoodies for my 3 kids. Yeah. If they're on sale.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Can I have a huge round of applause for our wonderful panel, please?